Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning. It's Good Friday morning to everyone listening to the show, waiting for the right day to roll around for that joke to be worth doing once a year. But guess what? I'm going to do it 60 or 70 times a year and just say it isn't Good Friday morning, but it would be. You get the idea. Anyway, I don't know. Today is supposed to be like super exciting. And sometimes I miss it, like Talk Like a Pirate Day. And I can't believe it because I'm thinking about it the whole year round. Well, at any rate, Good Friday morning to those of you who maybe have the day off. Do people take Good Friday off these days? I guess if it coincides with a spring break or you're going to go somewhere for Easter, you might be traveling. I was thinking about this back in school days when I was going to school. We didn't have very often, I guess maybe spring break was the following week during my schooling, and they gave us Good Friday off, but they, made it clear that we were off for Good Friday, and, not being a practicing Christian, I guess it took me a couple of years to figure out, what was Good Friday all about, and I just thought, what a great Friday this is, because we get off. I'm not certain why it is, but we do. And then, I guess by the time we were in junior high and high school, they had abandoned that practice, and instead either rolled it into spring break or just called it early spring break. But back in those days, it was still an acceptable thing to do, to just go by the Christian calendar and not make any bones about it. Which, of course, all the conservatives want to bring it back because the day is off. You still get the day off, and you can still do whatever you want and go to church if you want to, even though that's not what you guys are doing with it. You're going to Trump rallies instead, but whatever. Okay. Times have changed, but not by that much. So let's see. What's happening this morning that we need to bring you up to speed on? Well, gosh, everything, of course. And I don't even know. Pardon me. Already I have to clear everything out. Little rough start to today's show. Okay, let's see. Grabbing a couple of extra stories to share with you along the way while I'm working and while I'm trying to read through my agenda for the day as it is. In fact, why don't we just let Bill set our agenda for the day with his morning tweet, as he usually does. The Kagro in the Morning radio show is live now. Kagro X regrets to inform you that Texas Governor Greg Abbott has detained the Easter Bunny. Oh, gosh. I had no idea. For 150 vehicle inspections, so no eggs and chocolate for the kiddies this year. God bless America. Yeah. I don't know exactly what's happening down there. Perhaps we can catch up on these things. But when I say I don't know exactly what's happening, I haven't figured out what Greg Abbott thinks his authority is, or whether he really even thinks he has the authority. I think he's just kind of doing this thing because he can, and no one is enforcing federalism or a federal law against him, but essentially imposing his own border policies, which is prohibited by the Constitution that you and I grew up with. Of course, back in those days, we were having Good Friday off, so how good was the Constitution anyway, huh? Right. Well, now, of course, one of the, another of the things that was just basically understood and settled law, and you can't do this because XYZ, is out the window. And I believe I saw mentioned the other day someone's, I guess, supposition that perhaps the Biden administration wasn't pushing back harder, which I don't even know what that means exactly. But they weren't fighting this battle with Texas on clearer terms because they didn't want to call any attention to the border if they didn't have to, except, of course, all the attention is now being called to the border. So, once again, you're not avoiding it. But, Democrats are very often slow to learn the lesson of, if we do this thing, Republicans will attack us. Well, if you don't do the thing, Republicans will still attack you. And they might even attack you by saying you did do the thing, even when you didn't do the thing. So you might as well do the thing if there's any benefit to it for you at all. You might as well just go ahead because you're going to get the attack anyhow. Similarly here, if we do anything, we'll call attention to the border. Well, if you don't call attention to the border, they'll call attention to the border, and they'll just say you're doing the opposite of what you're doing, or they may say you're the one doing all of this. I guess it looks like a lot of the plan for the Texas border disruption is to, intentionally cause supply chain disruption, and then we've all been primed to blame that on Biden and the administration, so it should be an easy play, I would guess. All right, well, let me take a brief break for the Good Friday sip OT here. Maybe that'll help clear things up for the sound quality this morning. So, people beginning to get worried because, of course, lots of things apparently crossed the border from Mexico to the United States, including lots of fresh food and vegetables, which will go bad and never reach the shelves and be the sort of pronounced shortages that people will see in their supermarkets all over the country. And Fox News and the like will no doubt be 24/7 messaging that the whole thing is Joe Biden's fault, though he opposes what's going on at the border at the moment because of it's what Greg Abbott is doing. And again, up until now, always sort of understood as unconstitutional for the individual states to set their own border policies for immigration or importation or both. And that appears to be what's going on. And, in another time, in another place, this would be a fairly serious confrontation. And who knows? I don't know whether they do anything about it, like in terms of, I say to me, arrest Greg Abbott. And say, you can try and argue your way out of jail for this one. But, we never do that sort of thing. It never rises to that level. And because it's never risen to that level, minus the Civil War, we all stand around not exactly sure what to do about it. I don't know. He seems to have given this order, but, he's not the one executing it, and I don't know. And what do you do to go get that? Where's a good jade helm when you need it? Is really what I'm asking. Why no, threat of federal invasion coming to the southern border to enforce the law as written? And, of course, the answer is I don't know what exactly. And Republicans, I'm sure, are saying, oh, it would be great. What a fantastic thing. This is everything we wanted, sending federal troops to the border. Well, to get rid of you, I don't think you were counting on that. You thought we were going to go to the border to get rid of them. But it turns out the leopards ate your face, and you don't like that. So anyway, none of that is going to happen anyhow, so it doesn't really matter. Plenty of other things going on as well, things to catch up on. This morning, it looks like the hot story is from where? Let's see. I pocketed the one I saw this morning. CNN reporting this, although I don't know who may be claiming to have exclusively discovered it first. Oh, look. CNN claims, for the moment, to have exclusively done so because it says so in the headline. CNN exclusive. It's the longest headline I've ever seen. So it must have been they got a special dispensation to do this in the headline. CNN exclusive, and then some quotes. We need ammo. We need fraud examples. We need it this weekend. That's the end of the quote. What Meadows texts reveal about how two Trump congressional allies lobbied the White House to overturn the election. Well, I think we were aware of the fact that they were supporters, but this is some interesting behind-the-scenes stuff that apparently is new to the reporting. Ryan Nobles, Annie Grayer, Zachary Cohen, and Jamie Gangel get the byline for CNN, published just this morning. And I've skimmed over the beginning of it. It's quite an interesting story. In the weeks between the 2020 election and the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol, almost 100 text messages from two staunch GOP allies of then-President Donald Trump reveal an aggressive attempt to lobby, encourage, and eventually warn the White House over its efforts to overturn the election, according to messages obtained by the House Select Committee and reviewed by CNN. The texts, which have not been previously reported, were sent by Republican Senator Mike Lee of Utah and GOP Representative Chip Roy of Texas to then White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. So you know who you're dealing with. Chip Roy and Mike Lee are known quantities, known figures. Mike Lee in particular holds himself out as, I think, Harvard law educated constitutional scholar type guy. Does he actually say he went to Harvard? He's one of those guys who occasionally astonishes you with, how in the world how are we supposed to believe that you went to Harvard Law and you hold these positions on constitutional matters? And it seems so ridiculous. And how could you believe such a thing? Let me see what we got here. No. Oh, okay. He's, okay. Am I reading about his father here? Let's see. The, early life and education section in Wikipedia says, Lee, born in Mesa, Arizona. Did you know that? His family moved to Provo, Utah 1 year later when his father became the founding dean of Brigham Young University's J. Reuben Clark Law School. While Lee spent about half his childhood in Utah, he spent the other half in McLean, Virginia, interestingly, a suburb of Washington, D.C. His father served as the first Assistant U.S. Attorney General for the Civil Rights Division. I'm sorry. No. The Civil Division. I saw civil and I got all excited. It's not the Civil Rights Division. That's a totally different thing. But the Civil Division of the U.S. Department of Education. What am I saying? I guess because I'm thinking of his education. U.S. Department of Justice from 1975 to 76. Then as Solicitor General of the U.S., which is fairly serious. From 1981 to 1985, Lee... his descent. Who cares? Did you know? English, Swiss, and Danish. Gosh, I must be exhausted here today. I can't read. I'm mashing everything up. But Swiss, that would be interesting heritage. I'm not even certain what it means. But English, Swiss, and Danish descent. And Danish, by the way, just delicious. But Passover being on the horizon tonight being the first Seder, it's time to get the Danish out of the house, unfortunately. So, for me, that usually means up until it gets dark, eat everything. I'm supposed to be gone by now, but I'm not orthodox in that sense. At any rate, what else happened to him in his early life? I was looking for where he went to school because then I saw if his father was founding dean of the BYU Law School, and then later it says president of BYU. I thought, oh, did he go to Harvard? Because that would be why wouldn't his dad say, what are you doing? He didn't. He went to BYU's Reuben Clark Law School. So that's the answer to that. I don't know. I thought he was one of those guys that held himself out as one of the Harvard dudes like Ted Cruz does. So all of that is wrong. And you can blame all of his faulty reasoning then on his father and BYU. At any rate, what's more important is how he spent his time between the election and January 6th. And apparently, I guess to long story short this whole thing, but I will read through the details, it is that he and Chip Roy started out, like most Republicans, fairly certain that the stories that Trump and his campaign and the White House were telling about massive voter fraud and the election being stolen, et cetera, they went in for it entirely. They said, as most Republicans did, we totally believe this. We certainly want it to be true. And we encourage you to fight on this is where they differ. If you can prove that it's true. And then, of course, most Republicans then changed their position, shifted slightly to, we don't care if you can prove that it's true. We just want it to be true. So we're going to say that we know it's true and everybody knows it to be true, and what kind of an idiot requires proof of this sort of thing. But apparently Mike Lee and Chip Roy were among the very few who said, wait a second, actually, if you can't prove any of this, this might kind of suck. This might really not work out very well. So that's kind of interesting. That's a new twist for me. I don't know. They probably were clearer about this, and we were probably clearer about our understanding of what their positions really were closer to the time. But over time, it's faded, and they faded into the background of all the Republicans who no longer care whether it's true demonstrably or even makes any sense on its surface. So, anyway, pardon me. I am going to just drink the rest of this tea and see if it helps me wake up at all. It's a tough day. So far, not so good for me for this Friday. But as long as it's good for the rest of you. And it's also a difficult concept of good to understand. But you have to be that sort of self-sacrificing type, I guess, to understand the concept there. Okay. Back onto the topic. All right. So the texts, which had not been previously reported, were sent by Mike Lee and Chip Roy to Mark Meadows. The exchanges show that both members of Congress initially supported legal challenges to the election, but ultimately came to sour on the effort and the tactics deployed by Trump and his team. That's stating it lightly. But, by the way, you won't be disappointed in finding out, oh, well, maybe they were level-headed after all, because there's a good deal of fairly significant cheerleading for very, very stupid positions, especially in the early days here. But eventually they get around to positions like this. The next paragraph is a quote from Roy to Meadows. "We're driving a stake in the heart of the federal republic," Roy texted Meadows on January 1st. That text was released in December, at first, by the House Select Committee and described as being written by a House Freedom Caucus member. Roy's authorship had not previously been reported, but apparently the content of the text was. But I guess without a name attached to it, people did not pay a great deal of attention to it, because I haven't heard very many people talk about that one, and that one doesn't even ring a bell for me. When situated in the overall timeline of events between the election and January 6th, the series of texts from Lee and Roy provide new details about how two Trump allies went from fierce advocates of the former president's push to overturn Joe Biden's win to disheartened bystanders. And therein really lies the problem. Disheartened, glad that happened. Bystanders, where were you when we needed you? There's no heroism in this story. You basically sheepishly realize, oh my God, I've been backing not only the wrong horse, but it's the stupidest horse, with the worst possible reasoning and doing the worst possible things for the worst possible reasons. I'm just going to stand over here and be quiet now. Now, this is when, patriots are supposed to rise up and say, no, despite my opposition to the other party and despite my support for this party, this is wrong. And not only will I just stop doing it, I'm going to stop other people from doing it. I'm going to speak up. I'm going to be heard. And, they cast the right votes when they were finally pressed to it, but they were nowhere to be seen standing athwart the movement there and yelling stop to the people who were supposed to be stopped. That's absurd. Anyway. So, as I said, situated in the overall timeline, okay, they switched their allegiances, essentially, and became disheartened bystanders. By January 3rd, Lee was texting Meadows that the effort, quote, could all backfire badly. And that's true and right, and he came around to the realization, but, yeah, A, a little late, and B, not particularly forceful. But shortly after the election, both men were encouraging Trump to keep fighting. That's what Republicans did. In a series of texts to Meadows on November 7th, Lee offered his, quote, unequivocal support for you to exhaust every legal and constitutional remedy at your disposal to restore Americans' faith in our elections. Lee went on, this fight is about the fundamental fairness and integrity of our election system. The nation is depending upon your continued resolve. Stay strong and keep fighting, Mr. President. And that's interesting, too, because he's texting to Meadows, but, throwing in the Mr. President phrasing. But I think it's just, this is the message I want you to pass on to the president. It's understood that you're speaking through Meadows to the president. So, and in all likelihood, Meadows is reading these messages to Trump, so why not throw it in there? Also on November 7th, Roy wrote to Meadows, "We need ammo. We need fraud examples. We need it this weekend." Which, of course, speaks to the pronounced shortage, I guess you could say, of proof and materials in support of their extraordinary claims. And I think I would have to translate this by saying, we literally have no idea what we're talking about. We're out here pushing for your position on the supposition that what you say is true, but we need proof. Not only do we need proof, but we're not really even sure where to find the proof. You need to find it for us. It isn't common knowledge, as we keep claiming when we argue with people face to face or on television about it. We really literally don't know what we are talking about. And yet we're set at the moment to fight on to overturn the results of the election. Though we have seen no proof and no proof that you're able to produce any proof. That's kind of interesting. I mean, I'm glad he finally gives up and says, all right, well, they've had ample time. Maybe the proof just doesn't exist. Maybe this problem doesn't exist. But neither of them have been outspoken advocates for slowing the roll of the Republican Party. Not then, not at the moment that they realized what was going on, and not any time since. So, anyway, in a statement to CNN, Lee's communications director, Lee Lonsberry, there's a lot of Lees going on there, said, "I'd like to highlight that Senator Lee has been fully transparent." Although we know that the meaning of the word transparent and transparency can be flexible for Republicans. Pointing out how Lee had called for an investigation into claims of fraud in the 2020 election, but ultimately recognized Biden as president-elect and voted to certify the electoral results on January 6th. That's true, and it's the most charitable possible read of the situation. But yeah, it's no great shakes, I'll say. Roy's communications director, Nate Madden, told CNN the text messages, quote, "speak for themselves." An attorney for Meadows did not respond to CNN's request for comment. A spokesperson for the select committee declined to comment. A source familiar with the committee's work tells CNN that Lee's texts reflect that he was a cheerleader before he was against it. He uses legal language to push blatant conspiracy theorists into the Trump orbit. Theorists, not just theory, but theorists. And that becomes important. You'll see exactly what they're talking about in the next sentence. But I want to linger on this sentence for just a second. It's, that's a good call. It reflects that he was a cheerleader before he was against it. But I want to focus actually on the first part of that second sentence. He uses legal language to push blatant, whatever it is, whether it's conspiracy theory or theorists. I just, want to highlight again the number of Republican lawyers who are using their legal education, fine as it may be, to do this sort of thing. They know that disguising something in jargon and making reference to legal theories that either are at best untested or at worst never had been heard of before ever and have no basis in reality or even in the wildest dreams of academic theorists. But if you couch the stuff in enough jargon, it makes it sound like people who don't know what they're talking about should listen to you because you're someone who must know what you're talking about because you know the jargon. It's a common trick, but, I want to point out the amount of guilt that these people actually bear for this early on. And in case you were, I'm willing to accept if the story ended here and all you got was the spin that, well, let me just highlight again that Senator Lee was interested in the initial claims and said, look, I'm for you taking all legal remedies and legal options at your disposal. But once it goes off the rails and becomes illegal and unconstitutional, I'm no longer with you. I'd say, all right, well, that's a fine thing to plead at trial or whatever. And you might even get away with it and convince a jury of it. And you might even convince me of it. But it is a matter of degree. When we say, okay, well, he was a cheerleader before he was against it, that's a nice counterspin. How much cheerleading and how far did he go? here's where things really turn ugly for him in the evidence game, if you will. Next section is set aside and runs under this quote, "Can you help her get in?" Now, that'll be Lee speaking to Meadows. Who's the worst her you can think of? Who's the worst, that is to say, who's the worst her that Lee could be trying to get in here? I mean, like, the word, not the worst her in the world. But, and I mean, I guess there are worse. Like, it could be, what's her name? Stormy Daniels. Like, at this point in the game, that probably wouldn't have made much of a difference, but that wouldn't be a good person to try to smuggle in there. But who's the worst her that Mike Lee would be willing to push for to get in? And the answer is, your guess for the worst is probably the right one, because the truth is, it's Sidney Powell. Over a few days in November, Lee lobbied Meadows to get attorney Sidney Powell access to Trump. Now, at this point, I don't know. Maybe she wasn't as demonstrably off the rails to everyone because we didn't have access to her communications until later, but certainly by the end of the process. By January, he's abandoned her. But Sidney Powell, my God, she's a total crackpot. And if I'm a consultant for anybody, I'd be, I guess I'd be advising people, scrub everything you've got that relates to Sidney Powell. She's out of her mind. Any time you spent lobbying to get her into the White House is, time added to your sentence. That's crazy. But maybe he didn't know it yet, and he changed his mind once he found out. But too bad, this is on the record. Sidney Powell is saying that she needs to get in to see the president, but she's being kept away from him, Lee wrote to Meadows on November 7th. Apparently, she has a strategy to keep things alive and put several states back in play. Can you help her get in? He doesn't recognize instantly how crazy this is. Problem.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Yes. So Mike Lee spends the early part of November trying to push for Sidney Powell's access to the president. Interestingly, he complains that she's been being kept away from him, which means that there are people in the White House who, as early as November 7th, early November, know that Sidney Powell has no place there and needs to be kept away for as long as possible. That might be like Pat Cipollone and others, perhaps in the White House counsel's office, acting there. But at any rate, he pushes on. Lee then sends Meadows Powell's cell phone number and her email, as if he had difficulty getting a hold of that one. On November 9th, Lee again pressed Meadows about Powell, calling her a, quote, straight shooter. Wow. Well, of course, I'm sure he regrets that and is grimacing at seeing it now, but too bad. Too late. You've done your part to set the chain of events in motion. That same day, Roy warned Meadows about Trump's approach, early on, texting him, "We must urge the president to tone down the rhetoric," good luck, and approach the legal challenge firmly, intelligently, and effectively without resorting to throwing wild, desperate haymakers or whipping his base into a conspiracy frenzy. So in case anybody ever wants to know and asks you for some reason, How effective a legislator and advocate is U.S. Congressman Chip Roy of Texas? The answer is not much. Nope, not with the Trump circles. Now, that could be a matter of, and I'm sure it is a matter of, trying to convince Donald Trump to tone down the rhetoric and stop throwing desperate haymakers or whipping the base into a conspiracy frenzy. It's just not going to work. So you might be inclined, if you were his defense attorney, to say, look, well, it's not Chip Roy's fault. He's still an effective advocate. He was just talking to a defective, person, a mental defective. Both Meadows and Trump were just never going to be convinced to do any of those things. That's not in their, not among their capabilities. That's the only way Trump operates, and telling him to not operate that way was never going to work. But it's more than that. It's not realizing who you're talking to and not picking up the signals at any point during the previous 4 years, or in fact 5 years, while Trump was campaigning the first time in 2016, not being able to pick up the signals that this is not a person who's going to be able to do this or willing to do this no matter what. No matter how persuasive you are, you don't know who you're talking to and you don't know who you're talking about. And that's insane. Anyway, then came the now infamous news conference on November 19th, where members of Trump's legal team, including Powell, Rudy Giuliani, and Jenna Ellis, laid out a series of false claims and conspiracy theories about alleged voter fraud. The messages started to take on a more critical tone. Ready for this one? Hey, brother, we need substance or people are going to break, Roy texted on November 19th, a few hours after the news conference wrapped. 2 hours later, Lee texted Meadows with serious concerns, saying he was, quote, worried about the Powell press conference. Lee told Meadows, the potential defamation liability for the president is significant here, for the campaign and for the president personally, unless Powell can back up everything she said, which I kind of doubt she can. Meadows responded, I agree. Very concerned. I'm interested in I would love to have seen a text from Meadows that said, I agree. I'm very concerned. And in particular, I would say, 10 days ago, you were pushing me to put her in front of the president in the Oval Office, telling me that I was too slow on the uptake for moving Powell to the forefront. 10 days have passed, and now you're like, I think she might be crazy. I'm not really sure why I said that. And, I don't know. He certainly should have upbraided Lee and Roy both for that. Although, I don't know. And then maybe Roy isn't on the record in this piece as pushing for Powell to get access to the president. But Lee is. And Lee's supposed to be the constitutional genius in this crowd. The news conference came as Trump's legal losses piled up in his effort to challenge the results in key swing states. And that, too, should have been an opportunity for Lee and Roy to say, well, the results are in from the courts and our theories were wrong. I mean, these guys did believe those theories. And you might say, to their credit, they stopped pushing them so hard and I guess maybe stopped believing them once they were losing in court. But I don't know that there's really any indication that Lee ever gave up on the theories. He just thought, all right, well, we're losing these rounds. And I think being a longer term, movement type thinker, he's just probably thinking, well, we can get courts around eventually to where these theories end up being validated. I mean, they shouldn't be, but we can force them to be. But yeah, I don't see any texts here. Certainly no text for him taking responsibility and all this stuff. This is all the responsibility stuff is spinmeisters after the fact saying, well, he changed his mind. But maybe there are texts later saying, I actually changed my mind, as opposed to, let's stop doing this because it's going to be bad for us politically. I'd love to see some texts that say, I don't know what I was thinking. I was totally wrong about that. And it certainly could be just about Sidney Powell. But even that is absent. So let's see. Next up is the section, I guess the transition from Powell to Eastman. By late November, Lee had shifted away from Powell and started promoting right-wing lawyer John Eastman, who a federal judge in California said last month may have been planning a crime with Trump as they sought to disrupt the January 6th congressional certification of the presidential election, calling it a coup in search of a legal theory. So what ends up happening here is Lee says, here's your answer. I still believe in the theories, even though the theoretician is crazy. Sidney Powell, no, she's nuts. No, get rid of her. We want John Eastman in there instead, who has the same theory, but hasn't yet been declared mentally incompetent. Well, of course, now he has been. And so these texts don't look any better in hindsight than the Sidney Powell ones did. Privately, Roy was also texting Meadows with support for Eastman and criticizing Giuliani. Have you talked to John Eastman? Roy texted on November 22nd. Get Eastman to file in front of Pennsylvania Board of Elections. Get data in front of public domain. Frigging Rudy, he says frigging Rudy needs to hush. You need to hush. Oh my God. I mean, these two, towering legal minds, cannot discern that there's no daylight between what Giuliani and Powell and Eastman are promoting here. It's just a different packaging. And it might be that they're just sending messaging advice, but then you can't give them credit for coming to the realization that the legal theories were pointless if they won't say that the legal theories are pointless. They just support them in a different form and delivered by a different person. By December, both Republican lawmakers expressed grave concerns to Meadows about the plan to challenge the certification of the election on January 6th, which was Eastman's plan. On December 16th, Lee asked Meadows for guidance. If you want senators to object, we need to hear from you on that. Ideally, getting some guidance on what arguments to raise, which again, the towering legal mind of Mike Lee is saying, I want to help you, but I don't know what I'm doing. I literally don't know what I'm talking about. I'm saying there's voter fraud. Please send me an example of voter fraud. I'm saying that there needs to be an objection to certifying Biden's electoral win. Please send me the legal basis for that. I haven't been able to generate it for myself. I don't see it, and I can't think of it. Anyway, let's see. More of his text. I think we're now past the point, and again, who's sending this? Is this one Lee? All right. I mean, maybe it's just typo stuff, but I think we're now past the point, P-A-S-S-E-D. No, I think we have now passed the point, or I think we are now P-A-S-T past the point where we can expect anyone will do it without some direction and a strong evidentiary argument. Interesting, clinging to the old methods, and I guess here is a point of departure between Mike Lee and the rest of the Republican caucus, or conference, as they call it. He's embarrassed. He says, I'm not going to stand up there and say that there was voter fraud and that I will vote against certifying the electoral college count without evidence. And because I'm embarrassed to do that, as normal people usually are, I think also all the rest of the Republicans will be the same. They also they're not going to stand up there with no evidence and just continue to make these claims. But once again, the guy who, A, can't tell in early November that Sidney Powell's a crackpot and you should never, never, never write anything down that tells the president to meet with Sidney Powell, and the fact that he can't tell the difference between Sidney Powell and John Eastman, that there is no difference and that they're both pushing the same theory, and that he shouldn't be switching to Eastman isn't any better than continuing to stick with Powell. But he also seriously misreads the rest of the Republican Congress. I think we're now past the point where we can expect anyone will do it without some direction and a strong evidentiary argument. Surprise! The vast majority of Republicans will, in fact, stand there and do that without any, not only with no direction, but without any evidence in their favor. They're going to do it. and you couldn't see that was happening. Now, December 16th, it's already past the time, safe harbor date, and the Electoral College has cast its votes. On December 31st, Roy expressed even more concern in a text to Meadows. The president should call everyone off. It's the only path. If we substitute the will of states through electors with a vote by Congress every 4 years, we have destroyed the Electoral College. Respectfully, Roy wrote. And he's right about that. That's true. But, again, his response to it when push comes to shove is to quietly stand aside and vote the opposite direction from the rest of the Republicans, but just say, no. And then just try to disappear from the scene. By this time, Trump and his allies were working behind the scenes to enlist portions of the federal government in the effort to overturn the election. That included urging Justice Department officials, including then Attorney General William Barr, to investigate fraud, even after the agency had decided there was none. Trump was also putting heavy pressure on then Vice President Mike Pence not to certify the election on January 6th. Yes, that was the plan that John Eastman was pushing, and you two idiots were the guys pushing for John Eastman to get in front of the president. In a January 3rd text to Meadows, Lee argued that Trump's effort to have states send alternate slates of electors to Congress was not legitimate. That is true. It was not. I only know that this will end badly for the president unless we have the Constitution on our side, which they don't. Lee texted in a note to Meadows, and unless these states submit new slates of Trump electors pursuant to state law, we do not. Lee wrote to Meadows. As CNN has previously reported, the plan to replace authentic electors with fake ones in a handful of swing states was orchestrated by allies of the former president and overseen by his then attorney, Giuliani. I love the actual phrasing here, of calling them fake electors and replacing authentic electors with fake ones. I know the people who were behind it don't consider themselves to be outright fake. They think they were cheated out of their legitimate spots as electors. But no, what they are is fake electors. And I'm glad to see them say that. And I guess Lee's on the right track here. I know this will end badly for the president. Now, by the way, how did Lee vote in the impeachment on that? I don't think he voted guilty for the in the verdict, right? But it will end badly for the president. Someone else will have to make it end badly, but I'm not going to do it. But I think it could end badly. Interesting. All right. Well, let's see. There's more. None of these alternate slates of pro-Trump electors received sign-off from the state officials or were put before Congress. Might as well emphasize that because I told you that. Right? That's one of the interesting things, I think, that I don't know why there wasn't more reporting about how that was going to go. But maybe it was just because it was unclear because there was no such thing as law anymore and no one knew for sure. But I was puzzled by that the whole time. Like, how is it that you think you're going to get these fake slates in front of Congress? Like, they're going to come into the mailroom unless Mike Pence, A, agrees to the plan, and B, goes to work in the mailroom and personally oversees the receipt of the fake electoral certificates and overrules the mailroom staff and overrules the legal counsel and says, I'm going to carry these fake slates onto the floor. And when the parliamentarians and the floor staff hand me the real ones, I'm going to put them aside and I'm going to open the fake ones and read it. Like, there's the fact that they got mailed to Congress doesn't mean they're going to end up being handed to the vice president. I was always puzzled about that. But so to no one's surprise, none of these alternate slates were put before Congress. While Lee and Roy both voted to certify the electoral results in favor of Biden, more than 100 of their GOP colleagues in both the House and Senate did not. Chief among them were Senators Ted Cruz, who did in fact go to the fancy schools, and Josh Hawley, also a fancy school guy, I think, of Missouri, both of whom Lee called out in his texts to Meadows, but never to a television camera or anything like that, right? I have grave concerns with the way my friend Ted is going about this effort, Lee wrote to Meadows. This will not inure to the benefit of the president. Lee added that unless new competing slates of electors were put forward in accordance with state law, and there really was no opportunity for states to do that at all, according to any state's law, the net effect could help people like Ted and Josh to the detriment of DJT. When January 6 finally came, neither Lee nor Roy joined their colleagues in objecting to the 2020 presidential election results. After the violence unfolded and Congress returned to session, Roy said on the House floor, "The president should never have spun up certain Americans to believe something that simply cannot be." He also texted Meadows, "This is a S-word show. Fix this now." Well, that's actually the end of the article. You could probably do another 14 years of shows based on this, and the hypocrisy involved too. Might as well add. I like that. This is an S show. Fix this now. I've been texting granted, he's been texting for a while. I don't think this is going to go right, et cetera, et cetera. But for a month, he's telling him, back off, change the personnel, do a different thing, find a legal basis, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm sure if none of that worked. But if I do text, A, I'll curse, and B, and I say, fix this now, they'll probably fix it now. They haven't been competent to fix any of it over the month or so that I've been telling them to fix it. But fix it now. That's just, CYA material more than anything else. Anyway, very interesting, and everybody writing about it. I don't think we need to read any other write-ups about it, this being a CNN exclusive, after all. But I don't know. Just wanted to sort of point out the weirdness of it all, and it'll probably work too. Like, people will say, "Oh yeah, well at least he swore off Sidney Powell early." But the idea of just switching John Eastman for Powell, like that too, will probably go over most heads. Not you guys. We talk about this enough to know that there's literally just, I can't say no difference between the two, but the idea of saying, well, I was early to jump off of the Sidney Powell bandwagon, but I ended up on the John Eastman bandwagon is no help. That's why they included that quote from the judge in the middle, the federal judges saying, no, this is as much garbage as what Sidney Powell was doing. And I don't know why we haven't yet convinced everybody that this is every bit as bad as Powell and every bit as dumb as what she was doing. Okay. Moving on, there's more stuff, and lots of it. So let's see. Oh, yes, right. In addition to what I had been hearing about what was going on at the Texas border with the trucks, there's another stunt that Greg Abbott recently pulled, which also could land him in a considerable amount of trouble. Let's see. I grabbed this tweet a couple of days ago. Ron Filipkowski sending this one around. You might have seen this stunt, and it's hard not to call it a stunt, wherein Abbott ordered, I guess, in his view, in an effort to bring the border crossing and migration problem to national attention, or to put the problem on the doorstep of Joe Biden instead of wherever else. And I guess it's interesting that on the one hand, I'm stopping all the trucks and giving them quote unquote safety inspections because I disagree with the whole constitutional separation of powers and the federalist system, etc. And I believe that I can and will make border crossing and immigration policy and trade policy my problem, even though it's explicitly not. But at the same time, I'm going to do this other stunt because, hey, after all, it's the federal government's responsibility to handle immigration and border crossing. So he holds both beliefs in true gamitarian fashion at once. So what's he doing? He's taking people who have crossed the border illegally and are being detained on this side of the border and saying, I'm going to dump this problem on Joe Biden's lap. I'm going to bus them to Washington, D.C. if you all want, their accusation, you all want open borders. No, it's actually quite difficult to get across and stay across. You all want open borders. You should live with the problems. I'm going to send the people who come across to Washington, D.C. instead of having them here in Texas briefly before they walk and move on to the other states, because they're not really terribly interested in staying in Texas in most cases. So he did that. He chartered some buses, I guess, and put them on a bus and drove, at least one anyway, bus to Washington, D.C., whereupon he, I guess, gave instruction. I don't know who told the driver where to go, but apparently instead of, say, driving up to in front of the White House and letting them out there, which would be maybe more symbolic, he wanted to guarantee that he got television coverage. So he drove them and let them out in front of the CNN building, so that there would be photos and video of it. Although it turns out no one was there to greet them, and so the only images I saw were pictures taken, I think, on people's cell phone cameras from out the window of the building. So they got very bad visuals out of it. But Ron Filipkowski here pointing out something else interesting about it. Not only is the governor interfering improperly in matters of immigration, but it looks, as he says, kind of seems to me like he's calling him Coyote Abbott violated this federal statute today. 10 years in prison, too, apparently, is attached to the statute. We'll see. He's taken a screen grab of Title 8, Chapter 12, Subchapter 2, Part, 8, Section 1324. That's a lot of designations here, but Section 1324 deals with bringing in and harboring certain aliens. Part A here, criminal penalties. 1A, any person who, 1, knowing that a person is an alien, that was the point of this, right, brings to or attempts to bring to the United States in any manner whatsoever such person at a place other than a designated port of entry or a place other than as designated by the commissioner, regardless of whether such alien has received prior official authorization to come in, enter or reside in the United States, and regardless of any future official action which may be taken with respect to such alien. But should have skipped it because it doesn't apply, because this is brings to the United States or attempts to bring to the United States. They're already in the United States. Let's see, Section 2 here says, knowing or in reckless disregard of the fact that an alien has come to, entered, or remains in the United States in violation of law, transports, or moves or attempts to transport or move such alien within the United States by means of transportation or otherwise. I mean, I don't know how else you move them. Forklift? That's still transportation. In furtherance of any such violation of law. In furtherance of such violation of law. Okay. And 3, knowing or in reckless disregard of the fact that an alien has come to, entered, or remains in the United States in violation of law, conceals, harbors, or shields from detection, or attempts to conceal, harbor, or shield from detection such alien in any place, including any building or any means of transportation. I guess you could think they were hiding in the bus for however long it took to drive from Texas, but Section 2 is the most applicable so far. There's also a Section 4, encourages or induces an alien to come to, enter, or reside in the United States. No. Engages in any conspiracy to commit any of the preceding acts, so he doesn't have to drive the bus or charter it himself. He can simply order someone else to do all of that. Or aids or abets the commission of any of the preceding acts. And they have, Section 2, we got a problem here, shall be punished as provided in subparagraph B. Any person who violates subparagraph A, which he has, for each alien in respect to whom such a violation occurs. I don't know how many were on that bus. In the case of violation of subsection A, paragraph 1, let's say A1, no, or 5.1, or in the case of a violation of subparagraph A2, yes. 3, no, not so much. Or 4, in which the offense was done for the purpose of commercial advantage or private financial gain, maybe not, be fined under Title 18, imprisoned not more than 10 years, or both. So I don't know whether it's necessary to prove that there was commercial or financial gain, because I guess that that would be more difficult to prove. I mean, personal political gain, but I don't know if they would accept that as commercial or private financial gain. Although these guys all run for office for the purpose of grifting, so there's a theory. Probably not accepted in courts currently, but hey, if I can change the makeup of the court and write enough articles claiming that it ought to be realistically considered, maybe I can win. Maybe everyone can be pre-wrong about what it means for finding commercial or private financial advantage in all of this. But he certainly did do the act. He's not supposed to be doing this stuff, transporting them to Washington, D.C. for political gain anyway. So anyway, of course, he won't be charged with it. I just thought it was an interesting observation. And another instance in which they'll get away with stuff. Let's see. Plenty of other things to share. And I want to try and find the best way to get around to some of these things. Although, all right, we're up against break time again. So probably not a great time to start on another story. We'll just leave it for after the break. Let's see. We got the alarm going off here, and 30 seconds or so before the music, and then 30 seconds to play out. This is an interesting thing, although I'm not going to be able to get it all in there. So let me just I'll give you the start. You know our good friend via Twitter, Ira Goldman, who tweets as KD by proxy, a process guy himself and a Senate procedure maven himself, had this interesting observation made the other day, and I guess maybe it makes for a good transition into discussions of the courts and how long it'll take us to convince everybody that they're pre-wrong about their understanding of the statute we just read. This is an interesting thing, totally unrelated to the statute, but process. Interesting. He picks up on this story, a tweet from Amy Klobuchar celebrating the addition of some statues in Statuary Hall of Justices Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Sandra Day O'Connor. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. So, as I was saying, a nice enough thing happening here. The chain of events here begins with the April 13th tweet from Senator Amy Klobuchar saying, "Today, President Biden signed my bipartisan bill celebrating the trailblazing lives of Justices Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Sandra Day O'Connor with statues in the Capitol. A permanent reminder," insofar as statues are permanent, you never know, "a permanent reminder of how they opened doors for women at a time when so many insisted on keeping them shut." So a very good idea, fine thing to do, and no problem with it or anything like that. What's more interesting is the process surrounding it. Like, I don't know, it's the sort of thing that naysayers, of course, can turn to and say, all right, fine idea, but how will it be paid for? It's not an enormous amount of money. I don't know what the going rate for a large statue is these days. And the ones that go in the Capitol are fairly significant. So I got to imagine a couple $1,000s a piece, right? Tens of thousands of dollars for the commissioning and then the materials and the casting and moving it and all sorts of things that go on around it. Pedestals, the whole parks. I don't know. What would you guess a statue costs? I don't know. Probably $100,000. I'd say probably not out of the ballpark, right? I don't know. Haven't commissioned any statues lately, but there's going to be two of them. And they're important, and they're going to be prominently displayed, so the artists are going to, want to be properly compensated. Maybe they'll donate their time. Who knows? But statue materials these days, supply chain, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, what about that? So Ira asks, statues of Sandra Day O'Connor and Ruth Bader Ginsburg in the Capitol. Sounds good. Still, being the congressperson that I am, not a member of Congress, but a Congress-type person, I wondered, why was a statute, not statue, but a law, why was a statute, remember, Amy Klobuchar begins by saying, President Biden signed my bipartisan bill allowing for these statues. So why was a statute needed rather than just a concurrent resolution? The non-surprising answer, for the money. Yet therein lies a tale, right? So it could have been done by concurrent resolution. The Congress declares we're going to have these statues. The president doesn't need to sign anything. They wouldn't need to sign a concurrent resolution. There doesn't need to be a law, in other words. But there is one. And, if it's just about the historic interest that, President Biden, I'm sure, was very excited to sign such a thing. He wants to have a part in it, and, you afford the president to roll in the whole thing. There's a signing ceremony. It's a great PR thing. Lots of reasons to want to involve the president. Lots of ways you could engineer it happening. But it wasn't necessary that there be a statute. But, of course, the money. And I think that, I guess, they have to appropriate the dollars to do it. And I suppose it's possible that you wouldn't be able to appropriate funds directly with a concurrent resolution. And it might be the fact that it might be the case. I don't know how they usually do it, but I guess with a concurrent resolution, you could authorize that there be these statues, but how they get there and how they're paid for is another thing. And usually, a lot of the times, the statues in the Congress, in the Capitol, are placed by the states, and I guess probably certainly the figure is chosen, and I guess the expense of making the statue is borne by the state and transporting the statue to the Capitol, etc. I don't know. At any rate, so I think what he's basically trying to say is I think a lot of times these statues are authorized by concurrent resolution. But if you need to pay for it too, you got to do it by statute because, of course, constitutionally, right? No money shall be drawn from the Treasury but by act of Congress. So they go that route. Still, there's more, as he says, therein lies a tale. Ready for this one? This is a great Friday story. For a great Friday, or at least a good one. Anyway, the bill authorizes money for the statues to be taken from where? How will we pay for it? From the Capital Preservation Fund. That's what it says in the bill. Created, and he has a little emoji after it. Like, what is the Capital Preservation Fund? And is that the appropriate place to go for that? Is this capital preservation? Yes, no, maybe. We don't know how it defines itself. Where does the money come from the Capital Preservation Fund, though? It was created by the, quote, the Arizona-Idaho Conservation Act of 1988. Huh. And as Ira says, I don't recall that one, so I went looking. And he comes up with a screen grab from the Arizona-Idaho Conservation Act of 1988. Who even knew, right? I wish he had started by pulling the language from Klobuchar's bill. But I guess, that's where it comes from. That's where he's able to say the money comes from the Capital Preservation Fund, which was created by the Arizona-Idaho Conservation Act of 1988. The Arizona-Idaho Conservation Act says, in this section C, from where I don't know, but funding, amounts available in the Capital Preservation Fund. Oh, no, I guess this is directly from Klobuchar's thing. I thought this was a screen grab of the Arizona-Idaho bill. But this is, I guess, her bill. Amounts available in the Capital Preservation Fund, established under Section 803 of the Arizona-Idaho Conservation Act of 1988, which you can find at Chapter 2, Title 2, rather, U.S. Code Section 2083, may be used by the Joint Committee of Congress on the Library for payments for the costs of creating and installing the statues obtained under subsection A without regard to subsections B and D of such section, provided that not more than $500,000 of such amounts may be used for each statue obtained under subsection A. So there's the answer to a part of our question anyway. The the legislative cap on how much they're spending on the statues is $500,000 apiece. No more than $500,000 for the Ruth Bader Ginsburg statue and no more than $500,000 for Sandra Day O'Connor. Which, I would hope that's sufficient, but I think we were guessing at $100,000. So it could be $100,000. They could get a good rate, but you can't spend more than $500,000. So there's $1 million being taken from this fund for the statues, potentially. And I guess, under the jurisdiction of the Joint Committee on the Library of Congress, essentially. Wow. Okay. Kudos to the lawyers who found this pot of money, by the way. Ira continues, I found that the Capital Preservation Fund gets its money from donations and from, quote, surcharges received on the sale of coins minted under the Bicentennial of the United States Congress Commemorative Coin Act. This is something. Boy, there are, just give you an idea of the number of places where a smart lawyer can dip in and say, I found $1 million. How much do you need for these statues? $1 million? Where are we going to find $1 million? Don't worry about it. I'll go to the Joint Committee on the Library of Congress and use the Capital Preservation Fund and the Arizona-Idaho, the Arizona-Idaho Conservation Act of 1988 and the Bicentennial of the United States Congress Commemorative Coin Act. And I'll just purloin $1 million. I like the statues too. Although, you could still convince me we could do something more important with the $1 million. They're important people, and I hope to inspire service in young girls around the world because of it, etc. And invaluable, I understand. But, all right, you know what I'm talking about. So anyway, Ira then says, the Bicentennial of the United States Congress Commemorative Coin Act. I got to go find that one. What's that about? It's surcharges. How are we raising this money exactly? There is the point that it gets money from donations, but who's donating to what? Suppose I wanted to donate money to. What am I even donating to? The Joint Committee on the Library? The Capital Preservation Fund, I guess? I don't know. All right, so what's this Coin Act? He's got the screen grab. This from under the Capital Preservation Fund codification here. Section 803A. In general, there is established in the Treasury a fund to be known as the, quote, Capital Preservation Fund, hereinafter in this title referred to as the Fund, which shall consist of 1. Amounts deposited and interest and proceeds credited under subsection D2, obligations obtained under subsection E. You see how annoying this is. And 3, all surcharges received by the Secretary of the Treasury from the sale of coins minted under the Bicentennial of the United States Congress Commemorative Coin Act. Couldn't get the rest of the word act out there somehow. So, okay, now we're in the Capital Preservation Fund section. Find the Coin Act. He finds it. I found the act and saw that it authorized the issuance of $5 gold coins, $1 silver coins, and $50 clad coins, whatever that means, silver clad, right? To be sold at a price based on their cost plus these surcharges at amounts specified in the bill, which then raised the question, where would those surcharge proceeds go? Here's a screen grab of the legislation describing the sale of coins, and it begins with our favorite phrase from getting us out from underneath anything that could otherwise stand in the way. Notwithstanding any other provision of law, the Secretary shall sell the coins minted under this act at a price equal to their face value, plus the cost of designing and issuing the coins, including labor, materials, dyes, use of machinery, and overhead expenses. So right away you got to say, all right, well, how many of the coins do I make? And how much money did I spend making them? Divide it up and add that into the face value. On top of that, the cost plus the surcharges. Section B, bulk sales. The Secretary shall make any bulk sales of the coins minted under this act at a reasonable discount to reflect the lower costs of such sales. And actually, does that work economically? I mean, you're not just making a batch for a bulk sale, right? Like if you say we're going to mint 10,000 of these things, if somebody buys 1,000, that's nice, but that doesn't reduce the cost of producing that 1,000. It's still the same as it was to produce the other 9,000. Maybe the sales and the shipping of the delivery of the coins might cost less, but I don't know whether that makes any sense. It sounds like somebody planned on buying 1,000 of the things for investment value and wanted a discount and wrote that into the bill for themselves. C, prepaid orders. The Secretary shall accept prepaid orders for the coins minted under this act prior to the issuance of such coins. Sales prices with respect to such prepaid orders shall be at a reasonable discount. That, too, doesn't make any particular sense, and I'm not certain how they know how to price the things given that they haven't yet spent the money to make them and therefore don't know what the cost is and haven't been able to figure that into the price either. But I don't know. Anyway, that's not the important part. Important part is Part D, surcharges. That's the money that's going to go into the Capital Preservation Fund. All sales of coins minted under this act shall include a surcharge of $35 per coin for the $5 coins, $7 per coin for the $1 coins, and $1 per coin for the $half coins. So, you're not buying this as legal tender to use in circulation, and it might not even be legal tender to use in circulation. You're buying it for the collector value. But again, if you want a $5 coin, you got to pay the cost of making the coin, $35 surcharge, plus what else was it? There was another cost that was supposed to be added in. Oh, right. Well, the face value of the thing. So the $5 plus the $35 surcharge, $40 plus whatever cost. So I don't know. It's probably in the neighborhood of $45, $50 to get a $5 coin. And $35 of it goes to the Capital Preservation Fund, later to be used for statues of Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Sandra Day O'Connor, apparently, although that was probably not the original idea. So, IRA continues here. Can you believe it? That is, where did the Bicentennial of the United States Congress Commemorative Coin Act say that the surcharge proceeds go? Now, you may be thinking, I already answered that up in tweet 3. They go to the Capital Preservation Fund, to which I say, yes, but not yet, because it's more complicated than all of that, believe it or not. See, when Congress decided to enact a law to issue a coin commemorating itself, which is an odd thing to do, but maybe someone thought that it looked a bit vain. And so they decided to add some public spirit to it. How? By adding that surcharge to every coin and directing that the proceeds be used to reduce the national debt. So, okay, the proceeds are supposed to reduce the national debt, but instead they've sat in a pot somewhere and you were grabbing at $1 million at a time to build some statues. So what happened to the reduction of the debt? I don't know. But it's here in Public Law 100-378, dated August 1st, 1988. There's more to the screen grab setting things up, but I'll just read the relevant parts. Section 8 here, reduction of national debt. An amount equal to the amount of all surcharges that are received by the Secretary from the sale of coins minted under this act shall be deposited in the general fund of the Treasury and shall be used for the sole purpose of reducing the national debt. I don't know what happened to that. And I notice also that it's not straightforward, right? It's not the surcharges received from the Secretary shall be deposited, but rather an amount equal to the amount of all the surcharges received shall be deposited that way. And, you can understand why you want to do that. What if the wrong dollar goes in, right? All money is fungible. It doesn't matter. So probably the best way of handling it legally is to say, just so long as the same amount of money ends up in there. Now, IRA continues, on the day the bill was signed, August 28th, 1988, that money was, quote, for the sole purpose, unquote, of reducing the debt. But that didn't last long. not even 3 months later, Congress decided reducing the debt wasn't as important as funding things they might like to do. Which, that's the kind of thing Congress does. And you can make those decisions. It's just sort of interesting that cover doesn't even last 3 months. So it's something to keep in mind. This is like a good object lesson in all of this, right? Like next time somebody says, well, I'm concerned about the national debt and I'm going to write a bill. And my bill designates the proceeds of XYZ exclusively, in a lockbox, you might say, for the reduction of the national debt. But just like we've learned with so many other things, super committee, sequestration, et cetera, fiscal cliff, yada, yada, the doc fix. How many times have we seen Congress say, no, we're going to legislate by law, this problem has to be fixed, or this part of the debt has to be paid down, or we're going to impose fiscal discipline and blah, 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 blah. And then they just waive it. In this case, 3 months later, they just say that whole thing that says exclusively for the sole purpose of reducing the national debt. Once they've had the press conference, F it. Poof, it's gone. I just find that interesting, and I guess so does Ira. So, while that bill in August had been a transparent 3 pages to simply authorize the commemorative coins and modestly help pay down our debt, the November provision where Congress said, forget the debt, send us that sweet surcharge money, was quietly tucked into the end of this Public Law 100-696 of November 18th, 1988, an act to provide for the designation and conservation of certain lands in the state of Arizona and Idaho and for other purposes. Yes, it is the Arizona-Idaho Conservation Act of 1988. What has that got to do with the money from the commemorative coins? Not a thing. It's just one of those non-controversial sounding bills that you can pass probably by suspension on the House floor and by unanimous consent in the Senate. But then you throw in there, in however many pages it is, a little thing that says, forget that whole paying down the national debt thing. Now, TBC. What's TBC? To be, I don't know what. To be, usually to be continued, or maybe he's saying he's going to come back to this later, but usually, and it's not seen in this. Usually you say him saying, now to be fair, something. But this is the last of these tweets, so maybe it is to be continued. I am not complaining that Congress is using their capital preservation, parentheses, slush fund, to pay for the statues of Justices O'Connor and Ginsburg. Indeed, it's nice to see them putting it to righteous use. I'm just laughing at how the slush fund came to be. And right, there's nothing terribly wrong with all of it, but I don't know. I just made like a Good Friday diversion. And again, Good Friday. Gosh, that's why I did it. A great diversion and the kind of thing that you'll never hear on any other radio show because it's too damn boring. To be honest, TBH, you shouldn't have heard it on this radio show because it really is too damn boring. But I don't know. It was one of those object lessons, as I said, in how Congress does this stuff all the time. And next time, you could take it with a grain of salt. Next time, you would be taking it with a grain of salt anyway. If Ted Cruz were to get on the floor and say, my bill reduces the national debt and designates that all the proceeds of this that will go exclusively for none. It's that easy to undo. You just tuck it in a provision somewhere of some bill that nobody gives a crap about and just undo it. Not that you needed to be convinced that was doable, but it's a great example of the way they do these things. They can do it out loud and right in front of everybody and simply declare up is down and black is white, and we decide that new rules apply, whether it's nuclear optioning away the filibuster or getting rid of the lockbox or whatever. I'm not saying that Al Gore was being disingenuous in any sense by talking about those things, and it may often be the plan of the person who passes the first bill that money really will be used for reducing the national debt. And it may very well be that the person who designated those funds for the use of reducing the national debt voted against the Arizona-Idaho Conservation Act of 1988 for that very reason. Or they may have gone along with it and have known all along that it was garbage. I don't know. There's no way of knowing. I don't know. Unless there's somebody on the record, and this would be way too much research for this, but it'd be interesting to try if you had the inclination. I don't know if you could track down who inserted the provision that the proceeds of the surcharges from the coins should be used for reducing the national debt. There's probably someone taking credit for it in a press release somewhere later, but that's something you'd need much better research skills to find. And they don't mark each section, and sometimes people slip things in anonymously. But the answer is, I'm sure, somewhere in the committee process for the Capital Preservation Act, or the Commemorative Coin Act, the Bicentennial of Congress Commemorative Coin Act. Somebody on the committee there would have done it. I don't know whether they recorded it in a report that accompanied the legislation, but it'd be very difficult to track that down. And then, of course, you'd want to go and look and see how did they vote on the Arizona-Idaho Conservation Act of 1988, only to find that it was a voice vote and there was no on-the-record vote taken on the thing, maybe. Who knows? But occasionally these things do actually happen in that there are actually staffers who sometimes will remember this stuff and track it and say to their boss, I know you're on your way to the floor to vote for a bill that's on the suspension calendar. And remember that suspensions of the rules in the House require a 2/3 vote to pass, and generally speaking, for all non-controversial stuff. So in all likelihood, as a member of the majority in 1988, that would have been a Democratic majority, a Democratic House member, probably the one responsible for inserting the debt reduction language into the Commemorative Coin Act, although it was probably a Republican idea. Well, maybe they stole it and put it in there. There really are people who are up to speed on stuff and have enough institutional memory that they might say, hey, boss, I know you're on your way to the floor to vote for this thing as a matter of routine, because we don't know anything about the Arizona-Idaho Conservation Act, but I just got to tell you, you remember that thing you put in the Commemorative Coin Act back in, it's only a couple of months ago, so you don't have to call way back, right? In April, was it? Or August, rather? And you put it in there and you put out the press release, we're going to reduce the national debt. Well, the Arizona-Idaho Conservation Act, as great as it is, there's a provision in there that undoes that. And, we're not from Arizona or Idaho, so we don't worry about it. Wait, what if you are from Arizona or Idaho? And now you're being told you got to go to the floor and vote no on the Arizona-Idaho Conservation Act, which, in reality, and it's hard to see these things when you're on Capitol Hill and in the moment, right? People are going to say, oh my God, the people back home are going to be so pissed that I voted against the Arizona-Idaho Conservation Act because I'm from Arizona, I'm guessing. Because, like I said, if our member here is a Democrat, the chances, even in 1988, I get there were Democrats in Congress probably from Idaho in 1988. Maybe. I don't know. Joan knows offhand. She could tell me who it is. But at any rate, you got to be crazy to think people are going to be up in arms in Arizona. That son of a bitch, he voted against the Arizona-Idaho Conservation Act of 1988. Which, look, if it had been the Arizona-Idaho Conservation Act of 1986, I wouldn't give a crap. But this is the 88. So now nobody knows, right? But somebody is probably advising the boss. There really could be advising the boss to say, I know it's meaningless. I know no one will care, but you put that in there to with the national debt thing, and now you got to vote to repeal it 3 months later. You should vote no, just to be consistent on the national debt, because that somebody could call you out on. Except, you know what? No one's going to call you out on that either. Anyway, and that's how we spent half an hour talking about this idiotic thing about how they're going to pay. But, look at this. $1 million. This is nothing to sneeze at. Just got spent on statues, which I still, feel like they probably could have crowdsourced the money for that. Like if you had said, hey, I'm Amy Klobuchar. How you doing? I want to build these 2 statues, but I don't want to spend any public money on it because I'm concerned about the national debt. or whatever, even though this fund was supposed to be, I could insert a provision in this bill that says, send that money back to the national debt, by the way, like it was supposed to be the first time. And in the meantime, I'm Amy Klobuchar. Here's my email. Venmo me the money for paying for the statues. And you could raise $500,000 to pay for statues of each of those. $1 million for those two statues, I'm sure could be raised. People are raising $1 million for fake walls on the border of Mexico. They're raising $1 million to pay for diesel fuel for truckers to drive in circles around the Beltway for 2 weeks and then give up and go home. I think they could have done it. You know, it's not illegitimate use of the money. It's just weird. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. Let's see. Okay, I told you eventually I was going to get back to the courts after all of this. And I don't mean the mineral courts either. I mean the Supreme Court. I saw and grabbed this morning. How recent is the piece? It's a couple of days old. But I saw flying by on Twitter something I wanted to double back to. Stephen Vladeck, whose name we very often call out on the show, mostly as an expletive. Professor Vladeck from the University of Texas School of Law, and very frequently quoted on national security law, etc., but, very much into the whole January 6th thing as well, and just basically everything. Our interests overlap. He has a opinion guest essay, as they're labeling it here, in the New York Times, an op-ed, as they used to say. Roberts, that is to say Chief Justice John Roberts, has lost control of the Supreme Court. And it's true. And rather than try and explain it ahead of time, I'll just read you his more organized thoughts on it and opine along the way if necessary. Last week, the Supreme Court, by a 5-4 vote, put back into effect a Trump administration regulation that limited the ability of states to block projects that could pollute rivers and streams. You remember we made some quick mention of this because it was another tricky shadow docket, fake ruling with no explanation of what they were doing kind of a situation. And now we're getting a fuller analysis of what's happening here. So again, 5-4 vote ended up having the effect of putting back into effect a Trump administration regulation. Remember, the Trump administration sucks on the environment, right? The Trump administration regulation that limited the ability of states to block projects that could pollute rivers and streams. So no more of this looking out for the health and welfare of your state's people and environment. The Trump administration, which sucks, or I guess sucked at the time, and still sucks to even think about, says, no, you can't do that. No more protecting the environment. The unsigned, unexplained order in Louisiana versus American Rivers, that's a great title. Louisiana hates American Rivers, everybody, so we're going to get rid of them. But I'm sure American Rivers is the organization that was suing to say, hey, we should get rid of this stupid regulation. that undoes good regulations from before. Louisiana versus American Rivers came as part of a highly technical dispute over the scope of the Clean Water Act and leaves for another day whether the regulation is a valid interpretation of that Nixon-era statute. But the temporary decision cannot be ignored, especially because of the brief but blistering dissenting opinion written by Justice Elena Kagan. It's not the first time that liberal justices have called out most of the court's conservative justices for their increasingly frequent use of the so-called shadow docket, unexplained, unsigned orders like the one from last week. But it was significant for being the first time that Chief Justice John Roberts joined her and Justices Stephen Breyer and Sonia Sotomayor in doing so. With the striking public stance, the Chief Justice illustrated how concerns about the procedural shortcuts the other conservative justices are taking do and should cross ideological divides. He also made clear that what many have long suspected, or rather, there's no that in that. He also made clear what many have long suspected: the Roberts Court is over. The term shadow docket was introduced by the University of Chicago law professor Will Baude, B-A-U-D-E, in 2015 to describe the more obscure part of the Supreme Court's work, the thousands of unsigned and usually unexplained orders that the justices issue each year to manage their docket. Those orders are in contrast to the merits docket, the 60 to 70 cases each year that go through everything that you think of when you think of something reaching the Supreme Court or being decided by the Supreme Court. That is, through rounds of briefings and oral argument before being resolved in long, signed opinions for the court. Owing to its inscrutability, the shadow docket has historically received much less public attention or scrutiny. Most shadow docket orders are anodyne, matters as routine as refusing to take up an appeal or giving a party more time to file a brief. But far more than ever before, the court is using procedural orders on applications for emergency relief while appeals work their way through the courts to resolve disputes affecting the lives of millions of Americans, whether in blocking a rule from the Occupational Safety and Health Administration on a vaccination made for large employers, refusing to block Texas's ban on most abortions after 6 weeks, or putting back into effect congressional district maps that 2 Alabama lower courts struck down as violating the Voting Rights Act. Time and again, the justices are ordering lower courts to treat these decisions as precedents, even when, as in last week's ruling, the order includes no analysis to apply to other cases, which often makes the precedent difficult for lower courts to apply. Unsurprisingly, these rulings have provoked increasingly strident dissents from the court's liberal justices. Last September, when the justices refused by a 5-4 vote to halt the patently unconstitutional Texas abortion law, Justice Kagan criticized the majority not just for the substance of its ruling, but also for what that ruling said about the shadow docket. She wrote, "The majority's decision is emblematic of too much of this court's shadow docket decision-making, which every day becomes more unreasoned, inconsistent, and impossible to defend." Last week, by freezing a district court injunction despite a lack of evidence that it was harming the complaining states, the majority once again defied the requirements for the very emergency relief they granted. Justice Kagan wrote that renders the court's emergency docket not for emergencies at all, but rather only another place for merits determinations, except made without full briefing and argument. In other words, the principal justification for shadow docket orders, the need to intervene early in litigation to prevent a party from suffering irreversible harm while the appeal unfolded, was nowhere to be found. And I know that's kind of dense language, but basically I would say what it boils down to here is there are supposedly rules for the justices to follow when deciding whether or not to take action on shadow docket items, whether or not to step in to, as they say here, intervene early in litigation to prevent the party from suffering irreversible harm as an appeal works its way through, right? If you can step in and say, whoever is suing here, whichever side you're on, and whoever's asking for this relief, like the whole thing will be moot unless we protect you while the appeal plays out. That's supposed to be the real use of the shadow docket. We'll just say everything freezes in place until the appeals work themselves out. That's how you're supposed to use it, and that's the rule. And if it's not necessary to either party to do that, then the usual rule is we don't touch it. We just let it lie and let the appeals work their way out. But lately, basically in a game of constitutional hardball, the conservative majority has said, what if we just offered to freeze things in place even without the necessity of doing so, even when nobody will suffer irreparable harm, but the political outcome is better for conservatives? Can't we just do that? Should we do that? Should we? No. Can we? Yes. Who can appeal from the Supreme Court? No one. It's the Supreme Court. So they just start doing these things. And as I said, similar to like what Mike Lee and Chip Roy were finding, they were embarrassed eventually about the idea of taking to the floor of the Congress to say, there's voter fraud all over the place. The election's being stolen. We shouldn't certify Joe Biden as president. We should overturn everything, send everything back to the states. And when they realized there was never going to be any evidence provided to them about any of that happening, they got embarrassed and said, we can't do it anymore. And then they made the mistake of believing that other Republicans would think that way too. Same thing here, where essentially for 200 and something years, the court has said, well, if we just order stuff to happen, like I want this outcome. And for those 200 years, the court has certainly been saying, well, I want this outcome, but I'm the Supreme Court. Everybody expects that we're going to have to show, even if they disagree with it and say that our reasoning is stupid, we're going to have to show that we've thought this through. There's solid reasoning. We'll pull some other precedent. We could misinterpret things, or we could overthrow everything and overrule prior precedent, or just establish new stuff that everybody thought was unconstitutional up until now, but now, poof, it isn't. We could do all of that, but we have to set our reasoning down so that everybody knows what we're doing and knows how to apply what we say the law now is from here on in. That's expected, and we can't just order, do the thing I want, never mind the reasons. But again, finally, they've come around to this and said, I know this is embarrassing, but if we have no shame, then we won't be embarrassed. So let's just do this thing. And now they've begun to do that. And it won't be long. I keep saying that, the day is coming. It's clearly here with the shadow docket, but I think you'll find eventually, when it becomes necessary, that in the merits docket, you will find conservative justices, maybe some of these current justices, certainly justices of the future appointed by conservative presidents, will simply say, I don't know what to say here. It sucks from a legal perspective that we can't justify this thing we want, but we do want it. What if we just said that's the way it is? And instead of embarrassing ourselves trying to, falling all over ourselves, trying to come up with a legal justification for it and writing it down in an opinion and allowing all of posterity to laugh in the faces of how stupid our reasoning is, what if we just spare ourselves that embarrassment? No one decides they'll take it for the team. We just unsigned, that's the order. There isn't anything anywhere in the Constitution or elsewhere that says, the justices have to say what their opinions are and what the reasons are. That's just something that they've always done because they love hearing themselves talk. They should have had podcasts like me. Anyway, Now they can it was always the case. They always could have. But I think that they'll eventually arrive at that and begin doing that as a matter of routine. And at first it'll be shocking, and people will write op-eds like this one complaining that it's outrageous. And after a while, it'll be like banging your head against the wall, and they'll just be doing it left and right. And I don't know what that means for the future of law. I guess they could just begin doing that routinely, even when they're not embarrassed. Like, I'd rather just cash my paycheck and not write all this stupid stuff, even though I have clerks to do it. And I just, at some level, particularly with some of these newer justices, that might be essentially how they approach things. But, up to now, it's kind of been a point of pride, I guess. These people are at the pinnacle of their legal careers. They want to have input in these opinions. But I have a feeling that when we're getting to the Justice Kavanaughs of the world, and for a while, I think the Justice Thomases, although I think he's come into his own on some of that, poorly, but he has, they want to have a hand in these things. Or Justice Thomas does. Kavanaugh, I don't know whether he cares or not. But eventually they just say, that's what I hire smart clerks for. They'll write the decision. And if that's shocking to you, I thought the justices were guiding everything. And they were mentoring their clerks and teaching them the ropes so that they became brilliant constitutional lawyers. Maybe, maybe not. But I have news for you. That's the way a lot of Congress works, too. Members of Congress have very often very little idea of what they themselves have written as legislation, not just what they're voting on. Staff takes care of that. And I think we're getting there at the Supreme Court level. And so you get some, any number of Federalist Society ideologues. Why does the Federalist Society and why do the top law schools work so hard to put their kids in as clerks? Yes, it's prestige. Yes, it means that it'll lead to prestigious jobs in government and private practice as well. That makes their law schools look powerful and influential, and then you'll pay any amount of dollars to go there and to get yourself into it, etc., and whatever. All of that is certainly true too, but at the same time, for people like the Federalist Society, it's an opportunity to simply how do you get to the point where everybody has said that this is nonsense and unconstitutional and no one believes in it, but I really think it would make for great policy? How do you get to the point where, poof, all of you have been wrong all along, and the stupid thing that I came up with last week that everybody gave me the side eye when I explained it to them, is now constitutional doctrine? And the answer is, you place these kids through the Federalist Society in the position of writing the opinions and shaping at least the opinions for the justices. And, now you got justices who are kind of like, yeah, sure, whatever, I'll sign it. Or, yeah, sure, whatever, I'll vote for that outcome and sign nothing if it's embarrassing or just annoying and hard to write. Anyway, where were we with this? Right, that all the rules had been thrown out, and that last week, by freezing a district court injunction despite a lack of evidence that it was harming the complaining states, the majority once again defied the requirements for the very emergency relief they granted and the whole use of the shadow docket, etc., etc. And now it's just for effecting whatever you want as quickly as possible and taking no responsibility for it. Chief Justice Roberts, in this last situation with the Clean Water Act, sided with Justices Breyer, Sotomayor, and Kagan in dissenting from 6 previous shadow docket rulings. Not just this one, 6 previous rulings. But the Clean Water Act dispute was the first time he joined in the procedural criticism that the other conservatives were not just using the shadow docket, but abusing it. In that respect, his rebuke cannot be dismissed as partisan. By publicly endorsing the charge that the conservative justices are short-circuiting ordinary procedures to reach their desired results without sufficient explanation, Chief Justice Roberts provided a powerful counter to defenders of the court's behavior. Well, it was powerful to those of us who think that the court's behavior is inappropriate. Whether or not it will be powerful to the people who either think that the court's behavior is appropriate or don't care, well, if you start off by not caring, how much do you think this thing is going to weigh on your conscience? Yeah, 0. Justice Samuel Alito, for instance, claimed in a September 2021 speech that critics of these rulings are acting in bad faith. It's the critics. who are acting in bad faith because their real objections are to the results of the cases. Maybe, maybe not. There's also room for procedural objection, but suppose we do object to the results of the case. Wouldn't it also be valid to say, well, look, I object to the results of the case, but I also object to the fact that you didn't own up to what you were doing. If I'm going to be outvoted, there needs to be an explanation for what you're doing so that if it should ever come to pass that there's a Supreme Court majority that is actually A, liberal, and B, cares about procedure and precedent, they can undo this bad work and explain why it was bad work. Now, they'll just simply have to overrule it, and they won't be able to say much except for the fact that, well, we're overruling it because the record supporting it in the first place was insufficient. At which point, of course, you will cry and say, that's not a sufficient reason. You're the ones acting in bad faith, overturning precedent without properly explaining why the precedent prior was unfounded. And the answer is because there's no written record beneath it. I know, but why aren't you telling people exactly why what we said was wrong? Because you never said it. That's the reason. So we're, whatever. We're set up for failure in that respect as well. But how do you like that? That's some gumption. Alito says, you're the ones operating in bad faith because you're outcome oriented. I'm criticizing your outcome orientation. I know, but only because you disagree with the outcome. Well, yeah, but only because the outcome was nonsense and violated all the rules. But you still do oppose it, right? Gotcha. Anyway, what's especially telling about Chief Justice Roberts' dissents in these shadow docket cases is that unlike Justices Breyer, Sotomayor, and Kagan, he's often been sympathetic to the results. So this undoes Alito's complaint here, right? But to no effect. In February's Alabama redistricting ruling, for instance, Chief Justice Roberts agreed that the court should reconsider the interpretation of the Voting Rights Act under which Alabama's maps had been struck down. He just believed that any change in that interpretation had to come through the merits docket, not the shadow docket. At least on the shadow docket, though, that's no longer up to him. Instead, the court's destiny increasingly appears to be controlled by Justices Brett Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett. She implored an audience at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library just last week to, quote, read the opinion, as though there was one, before jumping to any conclusions about whether the justices are acting more like politicians than judges. 2 days later, she joined the majority's unsigned, unexplained order in the Clean Water Act case, in which there was no opinion to read. Justice Kavanaugh, too, seems more troubled by criticism of the court's behavior than by the behavior itself, going out of his way in February's Alabama redistricting case to criticize the catchy but worn-out rhetoric about the quote-unquote shadow docket in Justice Kagan's dissent. It's not the rhetoric that's wearing out, though. It's the court's credibility. The justices have long insisted, as Justices Sandra Day O'Connor, Anthony Kennedy, and David Souter, why I say Souter, I don't know, Souter, put it in 1992, that the court's legitimacy depends on making legally principled decisions under circumstances in which their principled character is sufficiently plausible to be accepted by the nation. The proliferation of principle-free decisions affecting more and more Americans, and with a clear, troubling tendency of favoring Republicans over Democrats, calls that legitimacy into increasingly serious question. It's understandable, then, why Chief Justice Roberts would finally speak out. No one better understands the stakes for the court's credibility and institutional viability. Well, I suspect that 2 or 3 of the justices actually do, and one of the incoming justices do, in fact, understand the stakes for the court's credibility, perhaps even better than Justice Roberts. But, we're trying to build him up here so that he feels like it's worthwhile to continue to speak out and maybe try to persuade somebody somewhere to listen to him. But, okay. Anyway, if even his objections can't persuade the other conservatives to stop abusing the shadow docket, then that may signal the willingness of the court's conservative majority to go even further in the future and to use the shadow docket to resolve even more significant and contentious constitutional questions. They certainly will be doing that. That's a given. And in fact, I don't know, that's not even a question. The fact that we're here talking about this particular case with the Clean Water Act, I mean, important, huge part of our policy-making apparatus, but, you know, whatever. Maybe not the most important thing of all time to everyone. But, I mean, they're doing it with voting rights. They're doing it with environment. They're doing it in everything. It's pretty clear there's no part of the law that they won't abuse the shadow docket to effect. So I don't think there's any question about that. And I don't know how much further they actually can go in the future in using the shadow docket to resolve even more significant and contentious constitutional questions. These are I think, among the most significant and contentious ones we've got. My prediction is that they will begin dropping the pretense of having to explain themselves on the merits docket as well. I mean, it may take a while, and the right case has to present itself. Because I don't think at this point there's very much on the merits docket that they are or would be ashamed of their outcome-oriented rulings on. But eventually that case will present itself. If they had been, say, more inclined to help Donald Trump reverse the outcome of the 2020 election, or if they should become interested in doing so in the 2024 election for some reason, so far, we don't see much interest in that, and they held, and I guess we're thinking about their integrity when they were ruling unanimously to toss out everything that made it as far as Supreme Court on appeals anyway. But should that day ever come, or some type of case like that, where it's just, no, this is just for partisan advantage and there's really no basis in reality for what we're about to do, then they'll go to that. But in the meantime, most of what makes it to the merits documents is stuff that, as embarrassing as it is, they really do want to speak out on. Reversing Brown v. Board. Gosh, that's embarrassing. Well, there are actually people out there now from the Federalist Society who say, no, I'm actually ready to go on the record with that one. So it might take something even more extreme than that. But eventually, I think that's where to go. The better or more daring prediction, I guess, and Vladeck has a reputation to worry about, and I don't because I'm an idiot, so the more ambitious prediction is, yes, eventually they'll stop offering explanations for things on the merits docket as well. All right. Well, there were a couple of other stories that I wanted to bring to your attention, and I'm running out of time because I went hog wild on this one. But it doesn't matter. I'm going to try to do it anyway. Just because I liked the headline on this one. And I like the headline on this one, or it's no surprise that I do, because it's one of Charles Pierce's piece for Esquire. And maybe even if I don't have enough time to tell you what's going on, I can at least give you the headline and intrigue you and interest you in reading it on your own. And the headline is, "When You're a Colossal Dick for the Sake of Being a Colossal Dick." What's going on? It has something to do with judges, so I thought I'd throw it in here at the end. House Republicans torpedoed a measure to honor a trailblazing black judge in Florida because he once enforced the First Amendment. And everyone knows they only love the Second Amendment anyway. What's going on here? I'll give you a taste for it before we run out of time. One of the more under-examined facets of modern American conservative movement is the tactic of being a colossal dick simply for the sake of being a colossal dick. Of course, you might have heard it put more eloquently by Adam Serwer over the years, where the cruelty is the point. By the way, I'm now noticing somebody else pointed out, and I can't recall offhand exactly who it was, but this is another term that they're appropriating, just as they did with fake news, where liberals were using it first to talk about the fake news sites that were pro-conservative, and then Trump said, I'll just appropriate it and everything I don't like is fake news, and now it's mostly associated with him. They're trying the same thing with the cruelty is the point, believe it or not. I'll see if I can dig that citation up and let you read it. So what were they being a dick about here? Some experts, he says, trace this phenomenon back to former Senator Rick Santorum, by the way. The energy behind this tactic is very often the inherent structural racism that has charged American conservative politics ever since it allied itself with the remnants of American apartheid in the mid-1960s. It's been a long march, but recent events have made clear that the time of those remnants has come around at last, so American conservatives can be colossal dicks just to be colossal dicks. And that's, I guess, what's happening. All right, what's going on? On Tuesday, a proposal seemed to be sailing through the House of Representatives that would name a Florida federal courthouse after Joseph Hatchett, the first black man to serve on that state's Supreme Court. The measure was supported by the entire Florida congressional delegation, Republicans too, and it's the kind of legislation that House members don't even have to be fully awake to support, usually on suspension, right? But this is 2022, and there's absolutely nothing normal about the House Republican caucus. This clip from the New York Times: in a last-minute flurry, Republicans abruptly pulled their backing with no explanation, and ultimately killed the measure, leaving its fate unclear, many of its champions livid, and some of its newfound opponents professing ignorance about what had happened. Asked what made him vote against a measure that he had co-sponsored, Representative Vern Buchanan, Republican of Florida, was brief and blunt. "I don't know," he said. Wow. So there were explanations offered up. You can read about them here in Charles Pierce's article. But basically, just what we were predicting. This actually is a good summation of what we just spent time on. When it gets too embarrassing, Republicans now in Congress, later on the Supreme Court, will simply say, "I don't know." But that's the way it is. The vote is the vote. You can't change it now. There's no appeal. And I don't care to explain myself.
Radio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
So that's it. That's it for the week. Have a good Friday and a great Saturday. And then, of course, a happy Easter to everybody and a good Pesach to everyone celebrating as well. Time now for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam, busy himself preparing a Seder meal, no doubt.